watching the results here with the election, it's still early as I record this, but it does seem more likely than not that we will have President Trump win the re-election that he wanted. And so what does this mean for student loan borrowers? That's the point of this video, just to talk through some of the things that basically I'm thinking about based off of just seeing these election results and watching, the New York Times needle point a certain way. So what would it mean if you did have a Trump Department of Education for another 4 years? What does it mean for the AR account adjustment? What does it mean for the PSLF waiver? All these things that were supposed to be implemented. And I'm imagining the Biden-Harris administration assumed that they would have a lot more time to implement these things. I think my biggest concern is about the IDR account adjustment. So that's my number one concern, because the SAVE plan getting repealed was kind of baked in. So I think that the IDR account adjustment is the big risk factor here, where if you are a staffer at Department of Education that is sympathetic to helping borrowers and wanting to do what you said you're going to do, the IDR account adjustment is the thing to really focus on right now. You're going to have to work your tail off if it's true that President Trump did win the election, which, again, I'm recording this before anything's technically been called. If that's true, Department of Education needs to work their tails off to try to get this implemented, because if they don't, what we saw in the 2016 to 2020 timeframe is a lot of things that were promised by Democratic administrations are simply not implemented in a Republican administration very aggressively or very effectively. And that makes sense. Like, the Republican administration in some ways just doesn't support what the Democratic administration did. And if it's not done through the force of law, then it gets dicey as to whether or not borrowers are actually going to get the thing that they were promised. So one thing I do want to point out is one thing I'm not worried about is PSLF, IBR, and that type of forgiveness. So that's in the law. It's written in the law. It's statutory. You absolutely have to get it if you qualify based on the terms of the way it was written. And there's some other questions coming in too about other things people are concerned about. So one example would be some of the expansion of PSLF eligibility that took place. For example, some physicians in California are able to qualify that weren't able to previously. I think that what's going to happen more likely than not is anything that is sort of on the edges, like the PSLF buyback, even the IDR account adjustment, probably will be mostly overlooked and just implemented quietly. Really, I think, if you look at the 2016 to 2020 period, there was a lot of stuff that just was not implemented at all. I mean, in a negative or positive sense, it was just not done. And so I think that, there is a solid chance, I think, that some of the edge cases around the student loan program will be left alone. But the big thing I'm worried about is implementation risk. If you do have, Trump administration, you do have to think about implementation and what that's going to mean for borrowers. And, if I was going to say, first of all, the Department of Education has to issue loans. They don't have a choice. So they do absolutely have to issue student loans. Like, that's in the law. So you will absolutely still have the same federal student loan program, even if you have, even if the Republicans end up winning the House, you would still have a filibuster-proof, you would not have a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate. So it's not like the Republicans would be able to completely rewrite things like IBR and PSLF, and Republicans would be very unlikely to nuke the filibuster given their own preference for it. So I think that what we would see is another proposal, maybe similar to the 2017 Prosper Act, where they tried to push a very different student loan system, for borrowers, and that wouldn't get any support on the Democratic side in the Senate, and then that would just basically go nowhere. One thing I think that would be clear here is the SAVE plan is absolutely toast. The only question now is how fast is it dead? And will we get a ruling from the 8th Circuit before if Trump wins? Again, I'm recording this at about midnight. If that happens, then does that 8th Circuit come out with a ruling that says very clearly, hey, all this stuff is illegal, in which case they have that kind of to use going forward? Or do they not make a ruling and then would a new administration just drop it and drop the lawsuit? So that all that matters too in terms of how they do things. So I'm going to have a lot more for you guys. We obviously have to wait until the actual race itself is called. We have to wait until a lot of, we know a lot more about the composition of what Congress is going to look like. But it's a it's already a shocking result. And so we just have to think through, what does this mean? My job is to figure out, what does it mean for student loan borrowers? What does it mean for your finances and your plans for your student loans? So if you have any questions as it pertains to student loans, what the election results mean for those student loans, please put them in the comments. Thank you for following Student Loan Planner. I really appreciate you guys. Just put them in the comments if you have any questions.